Okay, I'm here with my friend Shannon Braswell, and he joins us now from Washington, the state of Washington, and I'm from Florida. So we're covering coast to coast today,
Yeah,
and we're gonna have a great discussion about mimetic theory. How you doing, Shannon?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Very good. So
It's always
we've
good to
got
be on.
we've been talking about a lot of different things off camera, but now we're gonna do
Yeah,
it official on camera
yeah.
and try to recreate the magic of our
Right,
conversations.
right,
Now,
right, right.
so I want to get into some of the things that we've been talking about, which is, we're mimetic theory fans here,
Hmm.
so we're not going to do a lot of introduction stuff here. So if you're
Hmm.
listening or watching this and you're not familiar with the work of Rene Girard or mimetic theory, you might want to pause and do a little brush up and then come back, because this is going to be kind of diving in as fans of mimetic theory.
Right.
And so on my radio show, I do a lot of introduction type stuff. Okay. And I keep it, but I want to really dive into this. And that's why Shannon is going to help me do that. You got to have, it's good to have friends that have the same intellectual toy. And then we can start using this toy to analyze, or a tool, if you want to call it, using that tool to analyze not only contemporary events that we see, but also looking at history and how we got where we are from a Christian anthropological framework, which is the study of mankind, and how we can move in a better direction using the study of history. You're a historian, right? That's
So
what you said.
I'm a history major.
Okay.
I try to keep that, yeah, because when you say somebody's a historian in the academic world, they'll say, well, do you have a PhD? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Do
Let's
you
say
have a
what?
master's
So
degree?
where's your paper on critical theory? If you're a historian, right?
Yeah, right. Or what other languages do you speak? Do you
Right.
speak German
Right.
or French or something like that? And
Or
so,
where's your membership to the Marxist Communist Party of America?
right, it's got to be something. You got
You
to
got to
have some
have
kind of,
you have some kind of proof of his being
yeah,
claiming to be a historian.
yeah. You got to have credentials. You got to be able to walk into a library and know which aisle you're going down. You know what I mean?
So, do
Uh,
you like the saying, as a history major? Do
yeah.
you like the saying, "History is written by the winners"?
Uh, well, I think it depends on. I think it depends on who you're talking about, right? So you know if um, if you say that you know the Gospels are history, right? If you consider that to be like a historical narrative, um, then I would say that's not exactly uh, history written by the winners, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But of course, you could talk about all kinds of people that are historical figures like Alexander the Great. People wrote about him. You could talk about Ramses and what have you. But um, there are all kinds of historical narratives where people have been defamed, right? And they weren't necessarily the people that were writing about them weren't necessarily the winners. You know what I mean?
right.
They could have been trying to like defame that person. So I'm thinking here of uh, the Byzantine emperor. I think it was Julian, his wife, Theodora. Somebody had there was a priest or something that had written about her and like defamed her, saying that she was a prostitute and yada yada yada, right? But there are other historical accounts of her like giving large endowments to the church and supporting a particular domination. So you know um I think it just depends on who you're talking about and what you're talking about. It has to, you know, yeah. I don't know. I guess that's sort of a tricky thing. But
Uh,
I would say the Gospels are not written
right.
by the winners.
That's kind of where I was going with this. Is that as mimetic theory fans and
Yeah,
understanding philosophical anthropology from a mimetic or Rene Girard influenced perspective,
yeah,
we have this weird, interesting phenomena in our
yeah,
history,
yeah,
wherein the story of the Gospels, written from the vantage point of the ostensible losers of
yeah,
that deal. You have
yeah,
a community with various
Right.
factions, and then there's a minority group that shows up called, Jesus and his disciples.
Yeah.
And they introduce a new perspective, and they lose, according to history, they get, Jesus gets murdered, he gets
Right.
persecuted, he gets humiliated, he gets crucified,
Yeah.
he's done, he lost.
Yeah.
But ever since that story happened, wherever that story goes, it awakens this ability for people to see history, especially contemporary history in their immediate past,
Yeah.
as being a product of a lie, and therefore needing to be changed from the perspective of the winner to the perspective of the perceived loser
Right.
or victim
Right.
in that historical period of time, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that's what
Right.
we're dealing with right now. As we look at the headlines,
Right.
we see this transformation of our historical memory from one of what the classical world or the archaic world even would see things from the vantage point of the winner's perspective,
Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
crowd that killed the victim.
Yeah.
And all storytelling was mediated through that frame that
Right.
humans had developed. And now
Yeah.
we've got the opposite, where in order to gain power, you must join the side of the victim in
Right.
history, particularly
Yeah.
contemporary history, because as the West, we don't want to go back to the ancient past.
Right.
Our
Right.
history, as James Lindsay was on my radio program, he said, that for the social justice West,
Mhm.
their Garden of Eden starts in the Enlightenment.
Right.
Where
Right.
everything begins.
Right.
I don't even know
Right.
what, if you ask them, what's the social justice theory perspective? What's critical theory's perspective on the Babylonians and how they treated
Right.
their right?
That's not. Yeah. That. Yeah. I don't.
How
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
colorism fit in with the Persians and what they did in their empire? It's like what we
Right.
started
Those.
in the beginning was the Enlightenment period, right? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
they get that "let there be light" thing a little literal. They're like, okay,
Right.
that's the Enlightenment. That's where history
Yeah.
started. And now
Right.
nothing ever happened before then.
Right.
Everything was
Right.
just perfect. That was just a
Yeah.
long, drawn out Genesis,
Right.
Garden of Eden,
Right.
or the
But
Enlightenment. That was the fall.
yeah. Yeah. But see, that's the thing for me is that, like, the reason why I guess you know, I- it was hard for me to articulate that when I was in high school and college, because I was always thinking to myself, well, okay, but what about like Christianity, right? It's so I think when you're in academia, you go to school and you talk about like political history and philosophy and stuff. It's always like it starts with the Enlightenment, right? That's we Western civilization woke up one day, and that's where we kind of you have the Enlightenment and industrialism, and we went on from there, right? But the Enlightenment also created, the idea of like social contract. You know what I mean? If you abide by these certain rules, or whatever society abides by these certain rules, we won't have conflicts. We won't have, wars. We won't fight with each other. But it's like, yeah, but if you look at the history, that's not exactly what happened. Like we ended up having like, two world wars. Colonialism happened. You know, uh, there were all kind of wars. You could talk about wars between between the Russians and the Japanese, right? And the Japanese, you know, won that war, right? I mean, you could say all kinds of things that somehow the social contract didn't really bring about the kind of peace that people were looking for. And you know, I think for the most part, conservatives, will use the idea of the social contract as a thing that well, we're rational beings. We have this rationale, like we should be able to think, and use the social contract to bind us together, right?
Yeah.
And then the left will say, well, it's people that matter, and it's their concerns and their feelings about certain issues that matter. So
And the
it's kind of
Enlightenment
like
itself is kind of the left. It's a liberal thing.
Yeah, it is.
But
It
it's the
is.
left responding to the old left, you know.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I could definitely. Yeah. I
I
could
think that's
definitely
what the
see that.
intellectual dark web, that group of guys are trying to do, or girls too, is they're trying to, you know, like restore the liberal enlightenment. Let us
Right.
just have a conversation, and that's just not
Right.
going to happen because it
Yeah.
was always a thin veneer.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was never, you know, it was a myth, as we would
Right.
say
And
in the
that's
mimetic
yeah.
theory way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's the way I would. That's the way I would characterize it, because it's you know, it's another narrative being told to try and, you know, bring people together or bind them together, right? But then as soon as, you know, you have a group that doesn't agree with that, you know what I mean, they're ready to break up the social contract, right? So somehow, you know, a piece of paper doesn't necessarily, you know, uh, bring people together the way that I guess, you know, perhaps Enlightenment thinkers were thinking, you know, it would. But you know, that's the one thing I think about, you know, Christianity, in the sense is that, you know, Christ's death is a end to, you know, previous cultures and their you know, sacrificing of humans, you know, or using someone else as a you know, as a scapegoat, right? Like we need somebody, or we need something to you know, create peace within the community, right? So like we talked, I was telling you about the in Rene Girard's book Violence and the Sacred, talked about the newer people, right? And how every
And where
every
are they from?
they're from the South Sudan and the southwest part of Ethiopia. So they're a what they call a Nilotic speaking peoples. So similar to like the Dinka or the Maasai people, uh, but they have a close relationship to their cattle, right? And so uh, you know, every head of cattle bears a human being's name within the community, right? So whether it was an ancestor or a living human being, they bear a a human being's name, right?
Right.
And whenever the, you know, I guess the you know, some kind of, you know, transgression takes place, right? The animal is the one that will get sacrificed, right? To take the place of the human, right? So that the animal bearing that person's name, right? You know, whether, you know, it could be like, you know, your great grandfather, right? But that cow represents your great grandfather, right? So if there's some transgression against your family, they'll say, okay, that great grandfather cow needs to be killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now, if the person says, I'm not gonna do that, right? Then you're breaking the social contract, right? And so now you don't have any. There's no mechanism to keep the peace there, right? Once somebody, you know, falls out of line with that, right? And that's what I meant about, I think, when I was speaking about, like, you know, say the right and the left, is that as soon as somebody in, you know, from the left, you know, the new left, doesn't want to go with that contract, then that's when, you know, the kind of, you know, peace is unraveled. You know what I mean? Because it's like they're the old, you know, the conservatives think that they're being rational by saying, well, let's appeal to the social contract. But, you know, the left is like, we don't want to abide by that anymore because it's not meeting our needs. It's not doing what it is we wanted to do.
And
You know?
ultimately, they say it's a lie.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
conspiracy theory. It's a
Right.
conspiracy. It's not a theory. It's a conspiracy attempt
Yeah.
to subjugate people,
Right.
right?
Right.
That and
Yeah.
so the social contract in the new left perspective, in the social justice critical theory influence perspective, right, is an attempt to basically say, you know, the social contract was itself a conspiracy against the vulnerable, right?
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could see that. I mean, it's and my thing is, like, I don't necessarily think that they're they're wrong totally, in saying that. But I think, of course, the way that they go about it is, through like, destructive means, or, I'm gonna create chop or something like that.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I mean? So yeah,
Because what is the story? Because we're talking about myth.
yeah.
How would you summarize briefly, kind of like the myth of the social contract? What is the story? Once upon a time, there were what? I mean, it's you got.
Well, I think it's like more like, uh, we couldn't get along on the very things that um, that bound us together, or that were supposed to bound us together. So we just won't talk about those things, and then we'll deal with uh, you know we'll deal with everything on paper. You know what I'm saying? We'll write down rules and how people are supposed to talk and how people are supposed to deal with one another, right? And that's how we'll get along with each other, right? So if you think about, like, I think in terms of Europe in the 30 Years War, right? Like this divide between Catholicism and, say, uh, you know Reformed Christianity, right? We won't talk about that, right? We won't talk about, like, who has supremacy, the papal supremacy. We won't talk about um, you know, who has the right to do what, or whatever, in the religious realm, because it creates too much conflict, right? There's too many wars going on all the time, right? So if we just not talk about that kind of stuff, and we talk about, um, you know, people being born, with, with inalienable rights, that there's certain freedoms that they have, right? That you can do these things, but you can't do those things, right? You can, basically talk about these things, but you can't talk about those things, right? Um, that's I think that's the mode in which the social contract works. If like I hear a lot of people say, like, um, didn't your mother ever tell you not to talk about two things you don't talk about? That's uh, what was it? Religion and politics, or something like that. It's like there's two things you don't talk about: religion and politics, because it creates divisiveness or something like that. You know what I mean? And that's what I mean. It's like, create some kind of a contract where people are hush hush about the things that really matter to them in order to keep the peace, right?
Yeah, that's the two things I talk about all the time: is politics and religion.
Yeah.
And they say don't talk about it at dinner, but that's the
Right.
best place to talk about politics and religion, because all politics and religion originate in our original dinner, which was
Right.
ritual cannibalism. Okay,
Right.
I just said it. So there you go.
Right.
All politics and religion comes from an original dinner
Yeah.
called ritual cannibalism.
Yeah.
And humanity's been trying to forget that they did that all along.
Yeah.
So that's what this all comes back to,
Yeah.
all over the world, at the earliest records of human, getting along. How are they getting along? By dismembering of a common victim.
Right.
And they consume that person, and that consumption, that collective consumption of a shared body becomes remembering it back together. And that's where we get history. That's where we get the birth of culture, religion, from that perspective. And so the social contract says, no, that didn't happen. Right. What happened was we all hated each other, and then we decide, hey, let's sit down, let's have a cup of tea, let's work these things out. Okay, we can't kill each other. No, that didn't happen. It's always been mediated through a sacrifice.
Right.
And that sacrifice reminds people about what is necessary if you allow, mimetic desire, right? Contagious desire. If you allow that to go unchecked, we're going to have to sacrifice somebody.
Right.
And that's the way it works. And so the social contract is a myth, because first of all, I didn't sign anything. Okay.
Right.
And we all know that.
Right.
And so we're like, wait a second. So so the closest thing we have in America is, like the Constitution.
Right.
And then of course that's the number one project that's being attacked right now by the new left or whatever.
Right.
Because they're saying that's an invalid contract. That's a hypocritical contract.
Right.
That's the 1619. We got to tell a new story.
Right.
And so right now, what we're seeing is, I call it the twilight of the American gods. We're seeing a battle between the new religion that's trying to emerge based on victim identity, trying to overthrow the old religion of America, which was the American nationalist religion. The idea that, you know, there was these noble founders who sacrificed their lives. And there's a truth there's a truth there, but then it becomes, you know, well, then we see what they did to the victims that didn't have a voice, right? The Native Americans, slaves, women, all the different identities that we bring out about the founders. And so therefore, that, if we're going to call the Constitution the closest thing to a social contract, that's an illegitimate contract. The terms are void. We're going to create a new contract. And that's the debate right now in politics. Right?
And I think the other thing that goes along with this is the idea of like we had talked about the dismantling of like hierarchy, right? So, you know, I think Rene Girard speaks about this, and you know, there's many instances where you see it happen, right? Like where, you know, you have an elite population, you know what I mean? Like it's a small population, like, you know, 1% or something like that of the population that has, you know, all the wealth or whatever, right? And then, you know, you see that, you know, there's like a middle class group that has sort of communication with the lower class and the upper class, and they start to, you know, ask, they want more demands and things like that, right? And so they appeal to the lower caste or the lower groups, right? To you know, force change on the hierarchy, you know, to force change with the upper class, right? And so once that starts to happen, right, you have this dismantling of the hierarchy, and of course, you know, the lower class wants more of what the higher class has, and you know, you start to have this, you know, friction, right? And that's how, you know, like revolutions get created, right?
I think it's a little different in the case of what we're seeing in America. I think we're on the same page, but the way I think it's actually working is that it's the real rich billionaire class that has joined forces with the lower middle class and below to create a coalition against the middle class, the upper middle class and the middle class. So you've got the lower middle class, and then you have the poorer class, and then you've got the super uber elite, and they're all working together. The uber elite are the ones that finance the social justice stuff. They're the ones who are financing the lavish universities. They wrote the textbooks. They paid for the university professors. They've been creating this entire thing. And they work in hand with the lower middle class, and then the what's the lowest class? I don't remember what's the proper term we're supposed to say. I didn't read the social contract today. What's it? But there's an attack from, it's like a vice grip against the middle class, and the number one enemy on the left and the right is the destruction of the middle class, and the destruction, not the total destruction of the middle class, but the breaking apart of it so that there's not upward mobility. Because as long as the uber billionaires have a free middle class, guess what? Someone in the free middle class is just in that right spot socially, where they create a technology like nuclear fusion that puts out the elites up here that got solar panels and wind farms, you know, and they're like, wait a second, no, don't you do nuclear fusion? You're gonna So what they do, they go over there and they pay they invest in the middle class, some of the middle class and the lower income, to take that guy down, take this guy down. So this guy goes, oh, no nuclear fusion for you. I guess you're going to have wind farms and solar panels and oil for the next 100 years, guys. Have a nice day. That's what they do. You know what I mean?
I was also thinking in terms of like morals and things like that. You know what I'm saying? Like the middle class being kind of like the moral elite, right? And then you're talking about, you know, the upper class, and say that the lower class having these liberal views, right? Because, you know, most of the middle class, you know, have conservative views or have, you know, religious views, and the upper class have the same kind of views that the lower, you know, that you might say the lower class have in a sense of,
the upper class have the religious views of eyes wide shut, generally speaking. All right.
You
I'll
know,
just say it. It's okay.
yeah.
Everybody likes that movie.
Yeah. But you know, I mean, yeah, so yeah, I I think there's a lot of, you know, you could say similarities between, you know, historical periods in which, you know, things start to unravel when the more people, what is it, you know, it's like the more people that become more alike, the more they have something, you know, uh, you know, the more people that have something in common with each other, the more they fight with one another.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like, um, you know, you know, because you become, um, you know, envious, right? Or you become rivalrous with the person that has more than you, and the closer you get to that person, or the closer you get to the things that you're wanting, you know, it's like, okay, this is really happening. Like I'm trying, and so I really want to get that, right? And that creates, you know, you start butting heads with one another because, you know, the people that already have it, or the people that are, you know, um, you know, already in that class will start to try to find a way to suppress, you know, those that are getting closer to them, you know. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's happening at the top and against the middle, and then the middle to below and all of that. I
right,
think
right,
that the average American doesn't look at Jeff Bezos and say, "Ah, I'm going to get it him. I'm going to get him." They just
right,
kind of like you're like a god basically,
right, right, yeah,
and all we can do with a god like Bezos is just kind of shake him down for some donations or something.
right,
But we can't.
right,
We're not going to get this guy. He's not in our target. Who you
right,
can get is the dentist or the doctor
right,
or the
right,
lawyer
right,
down the
right,
road in a nicer neighborhood. That
right,
I hate that guy
right,
because you're
right,
driving the same road as him. You know,
right,
he's just within, or she's just within. You
reach,
know, you
yeah,
reach that it
mhm,
becomes what Girard would call internal mediator rather than
yeah,
external mediator like Bezos
right,
or
right,
you know,
right, yeah,
it's
yeah, no,
it's
yeah,
interesting, you know. It's interesting,
yeah,
and it's interesting too. I'm just thinking about that how like the founders were kind of
yeah,
like external mediators, but now that these statues are like vicarious symbols, where
yeah,
you can see that they're losing their stature in the minds of people from being an external mediator to now that we throw them down on the street and we spray paint them. Now they're starting to look symbolically more like internal mediators, you
yeah,
know, which
right,
is interesting, right?
right, right,
That's
yeah, they,
interesting because it's like supposed to be sacred that you can't talk bad about the founders. And
right,
then the left did, and they
yeah,
did it long enough that it's now been normalized that these are imposters. They don't
right,
deserve the status of
right,
being the gods of our national identity, right?
right,
They need
yeah,
to be just exposed.
yeah, yeah,
They need
they,
to be
yeah.
devoured so we can
Yeah,
create new gods, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, so it's like, you know, with at first they kind of started with the you know, like I saw in the, you know, they were started with like you know, Confederate soldiers or Confederate leaders, you know, tearing down
which
their
was
statues.
closer, which was closer, you know, the founders are up here.
Right,
The Confederate thing, you can take that down. It's not as
right,
high. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, because you can't try to. You know, it's like the argument goes, you can't try to rationalize what they did. You know what I mean?
Right. They were
There's no,
rebels against our nation. So
yeah,
why should you
exactly.
even give them any kind of
Right. And
monument?
so, yeah. And so then with I think the founders, you know, because they were a little more, um, you know, historical, you know what I mean, back in time, you know, then you have to really try to, you know, uh, make the legitimate case that no, these people were slaveholders. They were, you know, they didn't use like good judgment, you know, most of the time, right? So, you know, they deserve to be, you know, their monuments deserve to be shattered, right? And we need everybody to, you know, rally behind that, you know what I mean, in order to make
Well,
this a legitimate thing.
think about it from an anthropological standpoint. The founders, the founding fathers. That's like if it's a tribe, that's the elders, right?
Right, right,
So
yeah,
we're
yeah.
looking back in history and we're saying, who are the elders and what do they tell us to do?
Hmm.
Right. That's what we're
Hmm.
like. It's almost like an oral tradition, even though we have all
Yeah,
this mediation and text and things along that.
yeah.
But you think about it that way.
Hmm.
And so every tribe says, what did our ancestors, what did our fathers, what did they
Right,
tell us to do thousands of years ago or whatever?
right, right, right.
Ours is a small window. So we say, okay,
Yeah,
who, you know, So we have these elders that
Right.
create the social contract.
Right.
That's the sacred singularity. That's the beginning point
Right.
of our shared identity.
Right. Right.
And so what the left is doing is they're saying those elders were illegitimate
Yeah.
at the very core of their
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
And so we need to start a new eldership, a
Right.
new hierarchy,
Right.
completely from the ground up.
Right.
And that will take violence to do. That's
Yes.
ultimately what this is all about from an
Right.
anthropological standpoint.
Right. Right. And if you look at France, it was the same way, right? Like, the king was supposed to be, God's appointed on earth, right? I mean, it's the sacred, what do they call it? The sacred right of kings or whatever, divine right of kings. If you dismantle that, you have to create something new, right? I mean, so like with the French Revolution, they started a whole new calendar, right? Like, you know what I mean? We're tearing up everything. You know what I mean? They started a new religious system. So yeah, it's this idea that like everything needs to start anew. You know what I mean? You need to have a new rebirth. There needs to be new founders. There needs to be new, a new narrative, that's told in order for us to, reprogram, the people, reprogram the next generation, right? And you saw that in China, right, where when the Communist Party took over,
Right.
they basically killed all the elites, and killed all the academics, killed anybody that basically knew anything about the older older China, right? In order to create a new, foundation, right? So, that's, it's like, it's hard for me I don't want to demonize like the left and say like, they're completely like off kilter and like they're just working for like Satan or something like that. You know what I mean? But at the same time,
Well, all
I do.
politics is working for Satan at some degree.
Yeah,
We have to be clear.
yeah. But it's like you, at the same time, like you see that the way that they're trying to get their point across by using, violence or by you know, by antagonizing, right? Like you saw the whole. I know you heard like the about the video where the Black Lives Matter movement, they went onto like somebody's, like they went to this private neighborhood or something like that, and there was this this couple that came out with guns and stuff like that. It's the antagonistic behavior, and things like that. And what they're met with is, we have the social contract behind us, to defend ourselves against you.
If this is Lord of the Flies, they have the conch, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the conch is, this is my property.
Right.
Our nation says our private property is sacred.
Right.
Don't step 1 foot on here, or there's going to be a problem. And that's the agreed upon rules.
Right.
And of course, the local attorney general is saying maybe we might have to put them on some kind of they're investigating where the press charges.
Right.
Because you can't brandish or something like that. So that's an attempt to negotiate the terms of the social contract and say maybe private property is not so sacred in the new world order here.
You see what I mean? And that's the part that always got me, man. It's like there's got to be something deeper here that's going on, than just trying to rationalize or use emotion for everything. There's something there. And
wait, say that again.
I'm saying that, like, it can't just be completely rational. Like everything, what's going on can't completely be rationalized by, say, conservatives. There's an economist named Walter Williams.
Walter Williams.
Yeah.
I just talked to him this morning.
Okay. And I'm not gonna say anything,
You're
negative,
not going to
because
say what you're about to say. Okay.
no, yeah, because
I just messing with
I think Walter Williams is a great economist.
you.
I think Thomas Sowell
Yeah.
is a great economist. They're all great, uh, you know, economists. But the idea is that he said something about, like, well, if people say that you have to be politically correct, or if people say so on and so forth, you know your response is just be to ignore them, right? You just ignore them, because they don't, they're not basically being rational, right? That I should be able to say whatever I want because it's free speech, and the Constitution gives me the right to free speech, right? But the response to that is always going to be, well, then I think with the left, the response is going to be, I'm just going to ignore the social contract, right? So if you don't listen to me, I'll behave recklessly. I'll,
And that,
you know,
and this is deeply rooted not only in the founders, right? Because the
yeah,
founders said, I don't like your deal,
right,
King.
yeah,
So they're liberals who radically overthrew their order, and now it's
exactly,
coming back on them. And it's going
right.
to come back on everybody who's
That's
here now. But
right,
they're
right,
good. They're good to
right,
go.
right.
Depending
And
on
so,
your soteriology, they're good to go. They're
right, and
but
that's what, yeah, and that's what I mean. I think it's like when you were talking about a certain narrative that gets told, there's kind of like, this is where the narrative starts, right? And that's where we have to go. So that's what I mean about, like,
yeah, and the
you know,
founders' narrative was that the Enlightenment was the beginning of the good stuff, the best stuff.
right,
Well, they would
right,
also say Greek and the that they would
yeah,
incorporate Christian principles, but ultimately they would say the Enlightenment, which
right,
is where they're in, is where they're getting their ideas. That's where they're
right,
getting their social contract, and
right,
that's an older religion
yeah,
that was trying to supplant an older religion, which was
right,
Christianity.
right, right,
And now the newer religion, social justice ideology, is saying, no, we're taking out, the older religion of enlightenment. We're also going to take
right,
out Christianity too. We're going
yeah,
somewhere else. We're going
yeah,
somewhere back to the future or
yeah,
something. So,
right, yeah,
so that's interesting. I like the way,
yeah,
I like that setting, the way you were explaining the setting there. So how do
yeah,
you, so here's the interesting thing. I
yeah,
mean, man, I don't even know where to go here.
yeah,
So you got that couple. I
right,
like that scene there,
yeah,
analyzing that scene anthropologically,
yeah, yeah,
and you've got this group and they bust down at first they show video of them walking through calmly.
yeah,
The
like
media
it
is
busts down
playing
the
that.
gate,
But then
yeah,
you see the photo, whichever media you get a different emphasis. It's the
right,
opening of the gate calmly, or if you get the other guys, it's the gate is broken.
yeah,
And that's the different media war going on.
yeah, yeah,
And that's some powerful, right? That's powerful.
right,
Doors open, that's peaceful.
right,
Doors
right,
bent over, Lord have mercy, what is going on here?
right,
This is
right,
like Batman, the third movie of that Christopher Nolan trilogy where it's, oh
mhm,
my goodness, So what's going on here? So you go in there and then you have this weird camera angle where you don't know who's the victim and who's the victimizer, and your
mhm,
preconceived allegiance to which religion you like,
mhm,
the Americana religion or the liberationist social
right,
justice religion. Which
right,
religion are you going to see the frame of what you're seeing?
right,
So how do we unpack that scene? As Christians, that's where that's our dog in the fight. We
yeah,
pick the Christian team. That's where we're
yeah,
coming from.
yeah,
Of course, we would say that both of those religions, the Americana religion and the social justice religions, are just, perhaps you could call them, heretical deviations of the Christian religion.
yes, and I would definitely call it that. I
Both
would
of them, yeah.
definitely, yeah, no, I would definitely define them as, as using, there's something about both of them that are using the Christian narrative, to their advantage, right? I mean, I think with the left, of course, they've, especially like in the Black community, right? There, you have this, theology called the Black liberation theology, right? And I think younger generations tend to mix Black liberation theology with a little bit of, Marxism, or communism, without really knowing what they're doing, right? Like without really knowing that those two are being put together. And yeah, so that, I mean, I think that's definitely like a problem that needs to be, um, dealt with, like,
But you
because,
can't.
yeah,
But how can we deal with it if we can't reason it out? You see what I mean?
that that's definitely, yeah, that's a
That's the
hard
thing that's
one.
hard for Christianity in this moment, is because we know that we had to be skeptical about these Enlightenment style appeals to let's just all rationally think this through.
Right,
That's not going to happen. That's
right,
Piggy in Lord of the
right,
Flies with the conch, and we know what
right,
happens to Piggy. A rock goes on Piggy's head. That's the that is the glorious end of the let's work it all out and reason. That's just
right.
not going to work. I'm
It's
sorry.
right, right.
Hey,
That's
at the same
because,
time,
yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah,
reason this out. So I
right,
understand you can't escape it. It's not
yeah,
like reason doesn't have a place, but
yeah,
that can't
yeah,
be the number one weapon you bring to a mob. I
yeah.
tell people in, speeches and stuff I've done, I say, if you want to take reason
Hmm.
to a fight against the mob,
Hmm.
that's like
Yeah,
bringing
that's
a plastic butter knife to fight a
right,
mob.
right,
They're going to
right.
take that butter knife and eat you with that butter knife. You're not going to win. Okay. So you don't reason with the crowd with
Yeah,
these. Let us just have appeals to reason. And that's why the intellectual dark web wouldn't take. It won't take.
right,
I'll just
right.
say right now, hey, like those guys. It's not going
Yeah,
to take.
right.
You,
Yeah,
you, you
yeah,
just can't do that. It's because
right,
they're denying the real reality of anthropology that
right,
that Christianity helps us see.
right,
Notice that Christianity is borrowed from the intellectual dark web, but it's not allowed to take center place for
right,
understanding why
right,
humans are doing what they're doing. The
right,
mob is just a mob that we need to just push it down tighter with reason
right,
and force. Like what?
right,
That's not
right.
going to work.
And that's what I'm saying. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's like, because I listen, like I said, man, like, you know, I think Candace Owens is a good person. You know what I mean? Like, she's cool,
You're
but I
going to get
don't.
canceled for that now.
But Candace Owens uses the whole idea of, rational now, logic. I'm gonna blow up your argument. You know what I mean? And make you look like a fool, right? And see what that does is that just creates more anger and frustration, right? Because it's not, um, their whole thing is like we're not. It's a I would like it to, like, what you would say. Somebody was, I think it was Nietzsche or something like that. He's talking about, like, the, you have the Apollo, and then you have Dionysus, right? Like, the people that, always want to be rational, want to lean to reason, want to be logical, right? And then you have, the Dionysiacs or
Yeah.
whatever, who want to be, it's like, let's tear up everything. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, we have to be wild. You know what I'm saying? We have to, whatever, right? And, Rene Girard talked about that in his Violence and the Sacred, right? He talks about the Bacchae, right? And he talks about how, you know, uh, the king in the city, he's the rational one. You know what I
Right.
mean? He wants to, like, you know, he doesn't want Dionysus to come in because he knows what he's going to do. He doesn't want the revelry because he knows what's going to create. But Dionysus is
You
saying,
don't
I
want the
haven't,
orgies because the
yeah,
orgies won't end.
right. Or, like,
You don't want the
he,
wine because the wine's not going to end.
right. The wine's not going to end, and the wine is also going to create the violence that eventually takes place, right? All the women get drunk, and then I think, like a woman kills her own, like she beheads her own son, or something like that, in the state of drunkenness or whatever, in revelry, right? And so, it's like the but the myth there's something else that's hidden there, right? Which is, why is it that Dionysus gets on, like, why is it that the women end up being the ones that Dionysus attracts? It's because they're the ones that are being suppressed within society.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So they are the ones that, take on, like, the form of Dionysus, right? So there's like, the rationale is not hearing that they're suppressing a particular group, which is the women,
And
you
the
know,
origin story for Dionysus, I mean, is that the Titans tear his body piece from piece, right? That's the
yes,
beginning of his start, right?
right,
And
right,
so
yes,
his cult of victims have to tear other people apart in the
right,
image of his own being torn apart by the
right,
Titans. In
right,
our context, the Titans would be the founders,
right,
enlightenment, and so forth, if we're going to
right,
take it back to America, right?
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. So, it's kind of like, the you might say like the left are representing like the women in that society that are being suppressed. And once they get drunk, like they don't care anymore. They don't want to hear nothing about no rationale, right? So they're ready to tear up things, right? And the king is still trying to keep the peace, by being logical, or I'm gonna lock him up, or doing all these things. And he realized he can't do that, right? There's no logic working there. There's no rationale working there. You know what I mean? There's no amount of argumentation that's going to work there. So it's like the chaos still takes place, right?
Right.
And that's what I mean is that there's something about, no matter how much reason or rationale you try to use, somewhere along the lines it doesn't always pan out. You know what I mean?
So that let's go back to the piece of anthropology we were watching on National Geographic just recently with the couple in the mansion
yeah,
and the crowd, right?
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know, I don't know who's right. I didn't watch it.
yeah,
I mean, I know
yeah,
I wasn't there, okay?
yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah,
know how the camera is a lie, okay? I
right,
studied Werner Herzog. Thank you very much,
yeah,
guys. Come on.
yeah,
The film, the camera is always a lie. Don't tell me
yeah,
you can tell the truth of the camera. All right. Now, okay, yeah, it's always potentially a lie. I'll say that.
right, right,
All right. Okay, so if that's the case, so think about this. This is interesting. So you've got this couple, and by the way, what's interesting is the couple has since said that they're trial lawyers, right? They're Democrats. They support Black Lives Matter. Now we don't know whether they do or not, but that's what they're saying. And then what's interesting, I was online, they were saying that that a lot of the liberals were saying their mansion is a McMansion. Did you know that? So they were
no,
saying they were a McMansion. They were saying that the mansion that they were in, I saw this trending and stuff on the social media, that their house was gaudy and ugly and fake. And I thought, it's so interesting. Think about it anthropologically. So they're basically saying your mansion and its grandeur is not real. Your grandeur is nothing but profane, materialistic, capitalistic decadence, right?
right.
And they wouldn't even give them they wouldn't even give these guys their home.
Right.
And their animosity towards it. Their home is illegitimate. Their home is an imposter.
Yeah.
To what it's trying to look like, which is something that's aged and authentic.
Right.
It turns out the mansion, I believe, was actually an older mansion. It was.
Okay. Yeah.
But they were trying to take that away, to take the power away. Why? Because they've got to move it as close to an internal mediation. Here's an external mediator.
Right.
You've got an old mansion. We got to bring this down. It's a McMansion. It's an imposter. We can get, we can tear you down now.
Right. Devalue. Yeah.
So it's so fascinating there. To go back to your King Pythias story. So in this case, I mean, again, we're modeling this just for shorthand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Draft.
Right.
So that rich family with their big castle, that's King Pythias, right? And then you got the crowd, and I'm not saying whether they're violent or not. I don't know what was being said. But the crowd kind of is closer on the Dionysus side, right? Because Dionysus is the god of the crowd.
Right.
And as you pointed out, Dionysus, his followers are women, which means they are lower on the hierarchy.
Right.
In this case, you have protesters for Black Lives Matter of different races, apparently, and so on.
Right.
So in this context, people keep wondering, why do the conservatives keep losing? And the question has to be, why does King Pythias lose? Right? I mean, that's the answer. It's like, you answer that question with another question. Why does King Pythias lose against Dionysus? Right. And I guess you could go on and say, it's hard for thee to kick against the pricks. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about the Bacchae from that Violence in the Sacred, since you're fresh. You just
I read it a couple of months ago, but
Okay.
I mean, the way that I remember the story is that, like, Dionysus wants to be worshipped, you know what I mean? And he feels like he hasn't, like, been worshipped in a long time or something like that from this.
Why? Does it say why he doesn't haven't been worshipped?
I
Have they
can't
been they've been
remember.
too fundamentalist in the town?
Yeah, well, I think it has something to do with the whole,
Teetotalers?
like,
The taboos are they're a little thick. The little
yeah, I mean,
taboos are a little too
yeah,
hard.
it's like trying to keep the revelry and the chaos out, right?
But
And
it'd been a while since they've done a pharmacos ritual.
right.
That's
Yeah,
probably what it's about.
yeah. No, I think that it really has to do with the idea of, like, using reason over, emotion or irrationale, right? But the the I think the gist of the story is that, like, that's not how human beings are. We're not always rational, right? And we're not always, irrational. But that there's a kind of a a blending of the two, And whenever you don't have a whenever you don't have a mode in which to release some kind of anger or frustration or envy or what have you, right? It will that the internal, like, friction will get created anyways, right? So, like, the community will fight amongst itself, irregardless, right? Like, something is going to create, a mode of chaos or a mode of a sacrificial
Crisis. Yeah.
crisis, right? So, by trying to use rationale or use the logic or use the social contract or use, these are the rules of the kingdom, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is the way it is. Like, you just need to accept that, you know, whenever, the spark becomes the drinking, you know what I mean? The spark becomes the partying, you know?
It's similar to what Thomas Kuhn,
Hmm.
the philosopher of science, developed with the paradigm shift.
Hmm. Hmm.
That people think that scientists and bodies of knowledge are just rationally thought out, and every scientist comes in there and just says, I will question quantum as soon as I get into
Right.
the field. It's like, no, they
Yes.
don't. They get
Right.
assigned a spot in the
Right.
pecking order to go
Right.
fill out more detail about the reigning paradigms of knowledge,
Right.
like quantum theory or relativity or any other reigning paradigm of knowledge.
Right.
And Kuhn points out that these paradigm shifts happen in a place outside of, like, reason, of faith.
Right.
And of course, followers of Kuhn are very close to say that's not the same faith as the Christian faith, but to make sure,
Right.
because they're afraid of losing they want to
Right.
keep their hierarchy above the religious folks.
Right. Right.
And they got a nice hierarchy there, taxpayer funded nicely.
Yeah.
But what happens is that the paradigm shift happens when enough anomalies violate the shared believability of the reigning paradigm of knowledge that necessarily may not be true, but has been inherited by the faith of people's respect for the elders of the scientific community through the generations that have also
Right.
agreed that X is Y, X, Y, Z makes whatever,
Right.
So to the point where the way these he said it's like a revolution of a political revolution.
Right.
Enough anomalies pile up that people say, no, this
Right.
is not real, and they just
Right.
overthrow it, and a new
Right.
reign is established. It's not a
Right.
rational, slow process in that way.
Right.
And,
Right.
and what's interesting there is I was just thinking about, like, Dionysus is showing up because it's been a while since the paradigm has shifted.
Right. Right.
And that's why he's showing up, because there's enough anomalies in the community of this story that are poking holes in the sacred, dogma, the story that binds the community together. And there needs to be a little bit of a cleansing. There needs to be
right. Right. Yes.
Or the eternal return.
Yeah.
We need a return of a new era, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah, and so that is the, you know, that is the question for me is like, how do you balance, like, you know, the rationale with the, you know, needing to cleanse or something like that, you know what I mean? This need for, you know,
We
stirring up
tried
the
video
status quo.
games. We tried video games. You got
Yeah.
reason, mathematical coding
Right,
translated into an escape where you
right,
can shoot Grand Theft Auto, Halo,
right. Yeah,
CW, NWO Revenge for my millennial friends who played
right.
Nintendo 64. All
Yeah,
that kind of virtual trying to get it all out of your system. It's not
right.
working, I guess. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Probably
yeah, I
helped a
mean,
little bit. Maybe.
yeah. Well, you know what? I tell you one thing, like, because when I was a kid, like when I was little, I never played video games. Like, it wasn't, I guess it wasn't my thing. You know what I mean? Like, I would try to like get into it with my cousins and stuff like that, but I just couldn't, you know, try to play Tekken and Mortal Kombat, but it never worked out, man. I couldn't get behind it. But I would notice, like, when they would get upset, get angry, you know, they were ready to lash out on one of us for laughing at them for losing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
So
we,
it was a failed sacrifice, right?
right? It was a failed sacrifice, because, you know, it's like, well, bro, you still getting beat up in the program, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
So there
you
was a
know,
failed attempt at catharsis because that Mario
yeah,
goes do 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 do, and you're like, ah, God, you know, you
right,
get tired of losing because you're trying to play
right,
a game so you can win to
right,
check out from reality where you're not
right,
winning as much. You know, we
right,
all, everybody knows
right,
that. I mean, that's why
yeah,
guys like to play games. It doesn't mean you're a
yeah,
loser. We're not saying
right,
that. It just
right,
means, you know, it's an escape. You go to work,
yeah,
it's boring, you don't feel like you're winning. You go home, you check out, and you're
yeah,
winning. You're feeling good. You're
yeah,
accomplishing something.
yeah,
It's a fantasy. It is
right,
religion. It is a
right.
kind of vestige of the sacred, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because you know, you know, it's a releasing of, you know, all the anger, all the frustration that, you know, that's taking place or what have you. You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing, like you might say with some sports or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm gonna get into football because I, you know, like, I want to be part of the, you know, the violence that's allowed to take place.
Yeah, the
You know what I'm
simulated
saying?
violence, simulated
Yes,
warfare. Yeah.
yeah, the simulated warfare that takes place. You know what I'm saying? You know, I was even reading something about polo, like the horse game. You know, that sport was actually a mimic of like training cavalry. You know, it was meant to train cavalry in the Persian Empire, right? And you know, chess was a game in the same way. It was, you know, strategy for, you know, warfare. You know what I mean? So, you know, I mean, you know, their games have always, I think, kind of been sort of a less violent way of, like, you know, creating, uh, you know, uh, the warlike scene or the violent scene. You know what I mean? It's
That's
just,
why.
yeah,
That's why. Just a little contemporary connection.
yeah,
That's why we're probably going to be in store for a lot more social unrest as long as
yeah,
the sports are not allowed in America.
yeah, yeah, right. Because
That's
it's,
a
yeah,
practical, you know,
yeah,
because if you can't go to football, go oh, and do all the
right,
yelling. If
yeah,
you can't go to soccer, baseball, basketball, if you can't get it all out and do all your
right,
chants, because you know when I go in those football games,
hmm,
you know, I go in there, you know, because that's, you know, that's the
hmm,
weird guy that I am. I'm going in there like a Werner Herzog anthropologist. I'm like, look
right,
at this. This is so interesting. I feel like I'm a scientist anthropologically studying these weird. Look at the rituals of the wave and stuff,
yeah,
and then you get a little feeling, that little mimetic feeling, like I want to do it too, but it's like
right,
no,
right,
that's stupid, and I don't want to do that. I
right,
don't like this. This is it's
yeah,
just trying to draw me into their
yeah,
mimetic unity, and I don't want it,
right.
but
Being part
it's
of the
very
crowd.
enticing to just want to
Yeah,
give in and have fun. The
yeah,
same thing with dancing at a club or so. It's the same kind of
yep,
thing, pulling you
yep,
into mimetic synchronicity, you know?
yep, yep,
And
and yeah, and that's funny because the same thing you can say, like you said, with the dancing or going to a club, right? What does that often turn into after everybody then, you know, got drunk and been at the club for a long time, right?
Street brawling, right?
You know what I'm saying? The guy sees the girl that he wants, another guy sees the girl, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
They
boom,
bring
boom,
their
boom. Yeah.
posses together, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm gonna get that girl, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
and that was like that in high school too. You know, you'd have one table,
Yeah,
there'd be a fight over a
yeah,
girl or something, an
right,
object of desire that they couldn't share.
yeah,
And before you know it, they're throwing chairs. And then before you know it, the whole lunchroom's throwing chairs. You're like,
right,
what?
right,
Boom, boom,
right,
boom. People are
yeah,
throwing chairs, fighting
yeah,
everybody. It's a contagion of
yep,
aggression. And you
yep,
can feel it when you
yeah,
know, like when you're near a fight.
mm-hmm,
I remember like I was like younger, you know, like I don't
mm-hmm,
know, high school or college age or something early.
mm-hmm,
And I remember like there was a crowd of people around the mall, and it was like a mob scene that had mobbed around, you know, circle, ready to see these two people fight, two high school kids or something.
yeah,
And you know, I was just, you know, who I am, you know, I just cut right through the middle of that whole mob.
mm-hmm,
And at night, and you know, I just said, wait till marriage in the middle of the two people fighting. And then
yeah,
walked out. I tried to give like a shout out to Christian Chastity for all
right,
the teens that were hanging out. I think,
right,
and then as soon as I moved my head out of that little circle of the fight, they just started brawling all over. And
yeah,
I felt like I was Bugs Bunny, you know, where there's like
yeah,
you get in the middle and you're like, hello, boom, 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 boom,
right,
boom, boom,
right,
boom,
all
like
the
a
dust,
tornado.
yeah, yeah,
But even being that close to it, you could
yeah,
feel like I felt, you know, the adrenaline.
mm-hmm,
I felt like,
mm-hmm,
all right, you know, you can
mm-hmm,
feel the mimetic mirror neurons or
yeah,
whatever that are
yeah,
drawing you in to start flailing like them.
yep, yep, yep,
And that's
yep,
where we need to have. That's the conversation we need to be having right now,
yeah.
not left versus right, you know?
Right, right, yeah, yeah. It's weird, man. You know, it's like at the same time, I'm like, you know, it's you know, I think you were gonna say something about like, so how do we get out of
Yeah, because you know I'm a
that?
cheesy guy. I always, you know, a lot
Yeah,
of these edgy podcasts they like to believe it all despair, but I'm
right,
too
right,
sentimental. I'm
yeah,
too like cheesy. I want to always give a positive thing, you know.
yeah, yeah,
I always,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's so quaint for our generation. You go
yeah,
listen to these podcasts,
yeah,
and it's all about this. You know, we're too cool to give an opinion about what to do.
right.
You know, we're too
Or
above the fray,
yeah, yeah. Or it's
and you
too
know,
cliche,
yeah,
you
it's
know.
too
Yeah,
sentimental, too cheesy, too
yeah,
like try hard. But it's like, no, no, no.
yeah,
I think, you know, a responsible thing to do
yeah,
is if you know the truth,
hmm,
to tell the truth, right? And
yeah,
it doesn't
yeah,
mean that we have a monopoly on the truth and don't have it figured it out, but don't
hmm,
have it all figured out. But so yeah, what
yeah,
is it? You know, what's the
yeah.
solution?
I mean, I don't,
Because we got to
you know.
solve it today, or else the world is blowing up tomorrow.
We're the ones. We gotta,
It's
you know.
us. Yeah. I have a theory about how to stop crowd violence. What if we
Yeah.
could create a music that would have the resonant frequency that would
Mhm.
create calmness in a crowd? You could just have a drone come by and just play that song, and everybody just feels like,
Just
you
chill
know,
out. Huh?
like the Oasis song, "Don't Look Back in Anger" or something. Or just
Yeah.
I don't know, some kind of song. Maybe it has a frequency that
Yeah.
will create a resonance within the crowd that's
Yeah.
about to fight each other to be like,
Right.
I just want to give you a hug, you know.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But then they're just going to tear the drone apart and tear it
Right.
apart.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean,
It's better to kill a drone than each other, right?
yeah. I mean, so here's one thing. I think whatever it is that's going to bring people together, it's not going to be something that it's like a one stop shop. You know, like it's not going to be something that happens
Sure, yeah.
quickly, right? It has to be. I think it'll be something that is kind of unrecognized, you know, in a way. Like, you know, everybody. So like when the you know when the AIDS epidemic started and stuff like that, everybody it's like, I want a pill right now that's going to cure that. You know what I'm saying? Or you know, cancer or something like that. I want something that's going to cure it right away, right? But you know, I think people
Did you
don't
say
understand that.
cannabis or
No,
canvas?
cancer.
Oh, cancer. Okay.
I said, you know, something that's going to cure cancer right away.
Okay.
You know, I want something that's going to cure AIDS right away. I want, you know, and like I think what people don't realize is like, you know, those that process is slow. You know, it like, and it really when you find the cure or when you find whatever, it's really not going to be one of those things where everyone's, you know, it's like breaking news. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like a slow, you know, thing where it starts to, you know, circulate within society, right? And
Like
to where
yeast
you
in a loaf, right?
Yeah, 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 like yeast in a loaf. You know what I mean? Like
I've heard that
you don't,
before.
yeah, you kind of don't really recognize it as happening or something like that. You know what I mean? And I would say that like, you know, like with N.T. Wright when he's talked about like the Christian message, like by the time the Roman Empire had recognized that it was effective, there's nothing they could do because it had already sowed the seeds. You know what I mean?
That's what's going to happen with the left here.
Yeah.
By the time the right even knows what's happening, they've already sowed the seeds. It's game over, brother. It's game over. And I don't know how to. I don't even know how to really give a coherent like response to that, because there's a lot of good stuff with traditional. I mean, I'm traditional. I'm not going to hide like I'm out of it. I'm a traditional, conservative cultural person.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah,
I know. We weren't going to hide from it. Just don't want to get canceled for that. That matter. They want to. The thing is, at some point, we gotta just put some skin in the game.
Yeah.
And try to sort it all out. That's what Christians are supposed to be. We're supposed to be peacemakers that come in the middle of a left and right, or whatever the dialectical fabrication is.
Yeah.
We're supposed to come in as mediators and try to stop it. Now, most of the time, you just get eaten. Your lunch.
Right.
You're done. You came in the middle of a warring tribe.
Right.
You're the guy that's going to be sacrificed.
Right. You become the peacemaker, the real peacemaker.
Which is ultimately, unconsciously, why nobody wants to do Christianity.
Right.
That's why, every type of Christian you meet, you're like, okay, well, Jesus says, do not resist evil with violence. They're like, no, that applies to when you're at the buffet line and there's one roll left and the other one's going for it, and you're like, I'll just let it go. I just let you have that last roll. That's that. I turn the other cheek. See, I'll let you have that last roll. And that's about as far as they go.
Right.
You try to apply that to the voting booth. They say, keep your hands off my voting booth. Okay? Keep your hands off my voting booth. Jesus is in the lunch line, theology.
Right.
Jesus is in the Hallmark greeting card type situation. You don't. If you're going to bring Jesus in, it's for like a couple like little quaint, issues.
Right.
You don't bring Jesus into the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Jesus, Jesus didn't have nothing to say about the kingdoms of the world.
Right.
Even though it says he defeated the powers, and Paul says if they had known what they were doing, they wouldn't have crucified him because he destroyed them.
Right.
That has nothing to do with the voting booth. You march yourself in that voting booth. You go behind the veil.
Right.
Jesus tore the veil.
Right.
They put that veil back, right? They put the veil back. You go behind the voting booth and you do your dirty deed, and it's so sacred that you can't photograph it, like the Ark of the Covenant or something.
Right.
You can't photograph your ballot. That's a crime.
Yep.
Uh-oh. Why is that? Because it's an attempt to create a sacred mass ritual, just like as Girard would say, like when they would march the guy that they want to kill, they would march in unison until the man fell off the cliff because he had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And they could always say, I didn't do nothing, he fell.
Right.
And that's the same thing with voting. You go in that hidden veil.
Yeah.
Jesus tore the veil, and we said, nope, put the curtain right back. And now let's go vote. You go behind the veil.
Yeah.
It's a crime to take a photograph behind the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
And you participate anonymously in the perpetuation of the sacred.
Right.
And the reason why you do, and I'm not condemning it as like, we're being like anthropologists in that, and what Girard would say, just because something's, it's how do we say this? It's evil, but we're not condemning it self-righteously. Right?
Yeah. It's like it's got a little bit of.
They call it a necessary evil. That's what they call voting.
Yeah, a necessary evil.
Everybody who's voting, whether you're voting for Biden or Trump or Obama or McCain or whoever it is, they say, well, it's the lesser of two evils. It's a necessary evil.
Right.
That sounds like something sacred, right?
Right. Yeah. Or the ends justifies the means, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. We have to do this because this guy's evil or this policy is evil.
Yeah.
But if we don't do that, if we let go, we're going to get destroyed like peacemakers do. And that's why nobody wants to take up their cross.
Yeah.
Take up their cross sounds like a suicide pact.
Right. Yeah.
And people will say, I'll take a social contract over a suicide pact.
Right. Yeah.
I want to go back to that King Pythias. Now, I just like that story. So what happens at the end of that? We're going to finish this because I got to wrap it up. But
I like that story. Yeah, because I don't remember exactly what happens at the end, but I know for sure that
We have the trial. King Pentheus puts Dionysus on trial, right?
yes, but I don't know if that happened at the end. I
Okay.
think that was kind of like in the middle of the story,
Okay.
because he's on trial, and I think he goes, like, he puts him into chains, or like puts him into prison, but he breaks out, like he
Yeah.
gets out somehow. So I think of course it's supposed to be like a tragedy, but I think at the end, somehow, um, the whole, like, you know, revelry starts, the carnival, whatever you want to call it, you know what I mean, goes, it works its way. Um, and, like the like somebody's son, or it could have been a number of young men or whatever, they get killed, like they get beheaded by their own mother, right?
Because is
Uh,
this after they kill King Pentheus?
yeah, that I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember that, but I know that is the one of the results of denying Dionysus his worship, right? Like,
Which is,
so-
and
somebody's got to pay.
and Nietzsche says Dionysus versus Jesus.
Yes, yeah,
This is Dionysus versus the crucified one. And
right,
he says they're very similar but yet different.
right, right,
And
yeah,
to me, a friend of mine named Jerry Boyer,
mhm,
of Town Hall Finance, he's the editor there. He said to me, he told me about the Bacchae
mhm,
that Jesus quotes. It appears that Jesus quotes the Bacchae to Paul
mhm.
in Paul's description of his road to Damascus moment.
Okay, yes,
When he's in the Greek court of
right,
aristocrats, and they're like,
right,
"Who are you, and what are you here? What are you here for?" And he's like,
yeah,
"Let me tell you who I am." And he
yeah,
tells the story about he's on the road to persecute Christians
mhm,
because he has a zeal for the social contract of his time, so to speak, if we're
yeah,
going to take that from history and move it back.
right,
So he's got a zeal for his contract, which is
mhm,
Torah, right? So that's
right,
his
the
that's his
law,
zeal,
yeah, mhm,
and he's there to root out the impurities and anomalies that are violating the preservation
right,
of that contract. So in some
right,
sense, it's the same case as that couple who's appealing to their social contract to say, "Get on
mhm,
my property, and I'm going to brandish my gun at you." Right?
mhm, mhm,
I've got,
mhm,
you're not going to destroy Jesus's movement's not going to destroy the rules of the game here.
right,
And so it has to be stomped out by force.
yeah,
And so Paul's there to execute that zeal for the law.
right,
And on the road there, he has this encounter with Jesus, and Jesus says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It's
mhm,
hard for thee to kick against the pricks."
mhm,
Jerry points out, and that statement, "It's hard for thee to kick against the pricks," is what Dionysus tells to King Pentheus on trial.
okay, yes,
Basically this idiom that's from the Greek culture,
yeah,
that's basically saying, like, you can run but you can't hide. Well, how would you
yeah,
interpret it? How you can run
yeah.
but you can't hide, right?
It's basically, there's no, like, no matter how hard you try to get away from it, or no matter how hard you try to rationalize it, it's not it's it, it'll never be rationalized, right? You can't put it in some kind of logical terms,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Because this is something that is very, I guess, deep down within humanity, that
Is
they
this
need.
something? Is it a state? Do you think that idiom means? I know we're just kind of thinking
Yeah,
out here. Do you think that idiom means like fate? Is that ultimately just saying it's fate, or is it saying you can run but you can't hide? The God's in control here. Because
I
King
think
Pentheus,
yeah,
that's what Dionysus tells King Pentheus. The god of
yeah,
the crowd tells King Pentheus,
right,
who's a figure for the sacred order,
right,
you can run, but you can't escape my crowd, kind of thing,
right, right. Yeah,
right?
like, yeah, I mean, it's I think it's more in terms of, you know kind of like when Jesus says, like, the stone that the builder refused, will always be will be the headstone or whatever. It's like, no matter how much you want to deny, the 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 healing powers of this thing, you can't. You know what I mean? It's because it actually does some good, right? It's, I mean, of course, it's violent good, but it does some good, in the
But
sense that
but 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 that's what's interesting about this, is that Paul quotes Jesus quoting the Bacchae, quoting Dionysus.
Yeah.
So to me, the Bacchae was a very popular play at that time.
Yeah.
And so I analogize it as it's like quoting Terminator. You're like saying, "I'll be Bach." So if you're walking through, and Americans are questioning you, who are you and what religion are you from? And you're like,
right.
Well, I encountered, and he said, "I'll be back." And they're like, "Oh yeah,
yeah.
What are you from? The future Terminator? What are you?" Like you would immediately get that reference.
Right.
So when he puts that Jesus says that idiom that's famous from the Bacchae, it's interesting because it's like you have Jesus redeeming Dionysus there in some sense. Jesus is redeeming the injured crowd of victims, but he's also ending it too. He's ending it because it's the reversal of the Dionysus myth. Paul's on the road to tear people apart, just like Dionysus, who was born being torn apart, and then he continues the tearing apart by using his crowd to tear King Pythias apart.
Right.
Now Jesus is like reversing that. He's saying, you're on the road to tear people apart, to preserve the sacred order that you know.
Right.
And you think your sacred order of what you think of Torah is so far and distinct from the Greeks and the pagans.
Yeah.
But I'm going to quote this play from the Bacchae pagans and use it as a way to bring you out of your sacred zeal for your Torah and your view of Torah and show you what it is. It's a restoration of the pagan and the Jewish religion,
in a positive way, right? Like, because it doesn't continue the same cycle, right? It's like I'm gonna reverse it.
So Jesus doesn't tear down the Dionysian statue,
right?
And he also tells Paul, who is in the place of King Pythias in this encounter, if Jesus is the victim, he appears. Why are you hurting me?
Yeah.
And Paul in this case would be in the place of King Pythias. He's the one persecuting Jesus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the way it reverses the story of the Dionysus myth, because it's the end of the crowd and it's the forgiveness of the persecutor.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so like Rene Girard speaks about like why all the gods in the Greek pantheon or whatever become gods or whatever, and he says something about it's because they were victims first, right? So Dionysus is a clear example of that, right? He because he's the one that, like, I guess was not supposed to be born. You know what I mean? He was kind of like a mistake or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But then also, like he gets torn apart by the Titans, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. So he becomes this image of like the sacrificial God, right? And there is another God that is very similar to Dionysus, and he talks about it in the Violence and Sacred, and that's this god of the Aztecs who has this like flayed skin. He wears like a flayed skin.
Yeah. He's both the flayer of skin and the flayed skin.
And the flayed skin. Yeah. So it's kind of like they are the victims and the victimizers at the same time. You know what I mean? Like they represent that character. Like, I'm the one that was I became a victim of the people, or you know what I'm saying? And then I'm gonna do the same thing to others, right? I'm gonna show you that this is what was done to me, right? Like, and that's the only way I'll be recognized is through, that's the only way I'll be worshipped is through others becoming, becoming victims. So it's kind of like he talks about it. He talks about in certain ways like this, what he calls it, like this unanimity or this like way in which things there's no differentiation. Like you can't tell the difference between who's the victim and who's the victimizer, because they all once they join the group, they just do the same thing to each other, right? Like if I become the victim, then I'm going to victimize somebody else. Then once I'll do that, and then that person will do the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And then the group gets bigger, right? Yeah.
There's an engineer friend of mine named Dr. Barry Court who told me once that bullies are bullying their victims to replay the trauma that made them have the feelings they have.
Mm.
so as to learn through the reactions of their victims how they can work out their own trauma that originated their own complex that led them to bullying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
wow.
like
Okay.
you're
That's
picking on
interesting.
someone to see the reaction, to
Yeah.
see if they can resolve through their response
Right.
the internal dilemma that drives the bully to self-hate, to
Right.
perpetuate that self-hate onto somebody else. And most of
Right.
us we draw into the mimetic rivalry instead. We
Right.
either cower in fear, which can incite the bully to hurt more,
Right.
or we reciprocate that violence with more aggression, and then it's just an undifferentiated cycle.
Yeah.
But is there a way that we can encounter the mob, the Dionysus,
Yeah.
or the bully,
Yeah.
or the brutal police officer,
Yeah.
and to heal that relationship
Yeah.
by the way we respond? That's
Yeah. That, I don't know. We might have
let's
to
leave it there. I set that up for a future. That's the
okay. All right. You did that on
there.
purpose, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tune in next time.
All right. Yeah.
All right, man. I appreciate it. We'll
Cool.
do this again.
All right, man.